It was late spring in 1957 in the Cumberland Mountains of Tennessee. The air was still chilly, and fog enveloped the verdant hills like a thin veil concealing the secrets of the Appalachian Mountains. John Wayne, or Duke as he was called, was 49 years old. He was at the peak of his career after The Searchers, 1956, but his heart was weary of the dazzling lights of Hollywood. Duke drove a long, rented blue Buick from Nashville. He had flown from California to visit the Hermitage, Andrew Jackson's home, because his ancestral blood also came from rugged lands like this. A man at this age begins to think about his roots, he told himself, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the winding two-lane highway. No one knew he was here. No studios, no reporters, just him and the road. He stopped in Wartburg, a small town outside Morgan County. A hand-painted Tate's Diner sign lined the street. The parking lot was made of crushed gravel, and the aroma of coffee and baked goods wafted from the frosted glass windows. Duke, wearing a low-slung hat and a dark brown coat, walked in like an ordinary tourist. Erline Tate, the owner, a woman in her 50s, poured him coffee without recognizing him. That was what he liked best. Through the window, Duke looked across the street. A Cumberland lumber sawmill. The sound of chainsaws whirred and sawdust billowed. He had witnessed the whole thing. Wendell Pruitt, the 55-year-old foreman, his left eye lost in a planer accident in 1932, emerged from his office with a stiff expression. In his hand was an old lunchbox and a crumpled yellow piece of paper, an acceptance letter to the Tennessee Polytechnic Institute in Cookeville for his grandson, Robert. An accountant from Cincinnati, a cheaply dressed man, fired Wendell after 38 years of service simply because of an invalid, verbal contract when the company changed ownership. 2 weeks' pay, $112. No pension. Nothing. Wendell didn't argue. He just stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, then walked across the street into the bar. Duke watched, his jaw clenched. He remembered the sailors of Iowa from his childhood, his father, the soldiers he'd met on USO tours. This isn't how you treat someone who's dedicated their whole life, he thought to himself. Wendell sat 2 seats away from Duke. Erline asked, her voice trembling, "Wendell, what did they do to you?" He recounted briefly, his voice hoarse. "They took my pension. A verbal agreement. 38 years. Only 2 weeks' pay." Duke didn't turn, but he heard every word clearly. He recalled his own life, from Marion Morrison to John Wayne, the years of hardship and loss. Wendell's was the same. His son died in Omaha Beach in 1944. His grandson, Robert, an orphan, was raised by him alone. Robert was now his hope, with his college acceptance letter tucked into his jacket pocket. Duke stood up, dropped $2 on the counter, put on his hat, and walked straight to the public telephone in the back corner of the cafe. The sleek black telephone, its gleaming chrome knob, a symbol of the rare connectivity in this mountainous region in 1957. He dropped the dime and dialed Nashville. "Tim, this is Duke. I need a favor." The call was brief, Duke's voice low and decisive. He gave details about Wendell, about Robert, about the Cincinnati company. "I'll pay for everything. Anonymous? Don't let him know." 12 days later, a letter of credit arrived at the workshop. $46,000 from an unnamed trust. Enough for Wendell's pension, Robert's 4 years of tuition, and a small amount for home repairs. Wendell didn't understand. He sat in his 4-room log cabin at the end of the gravel road, his hands trembling as he held the letter. Robert, the tall, lanky 16-year-old, his eyes sparkling, exclaimed, "Grandpa, who did this? We don't know anyone so rich." Duke had already left Tennessee, but he still thought about them. He continued his journey, stopping in small towns, meeting ordinary people. In his heart, the act wasn't heroic. It was simply the right thing to do. Wendell Pruitt sat on an old wooden chair in his house, the flickering oil lamp illuminating the small, cramped living room. Outside, the Appalachian wind blew through the old pine trees, carrying the scent of resin and damp earth after the spring rain. In 1957, Wendell was 55 years old, but his shoulders were still strong from decades of work at the Cumberland lumber sawmill. His left eye, covered with a worn piece of leather, a consequence of a planer accident in 1932, gave his face a perpetually stern, unyielding air, like an old soldier. He remembered that day vividly. He was 30 years old, adjusting a large saw blade, when a piece of wood slipped from the table. Blood gushed out, and the pain was so intense, he fainted. When he woke up in the small Morgan County hospital, the doctor shook his head. "Your left eye is gone, Wendell. Thankfully, you survived." His wife, Clara, was pregnant with their first son, Thomas. She wept all night by his bedside, but Wendell only squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, dear. I still have one eye to watch my son grow up." Thomas grew up healthy and joined the army in 1942. "I will defeat the Nazis, Dad," he said before boarding the ship. Wendell was so proud that he hung a picture of his son in uniform on the wall of their wooden house. But in 1944, terrible news arrived from Omaha Beach. Thomas fell on the first D-Day. Wendell stood on the porch, holding the telegram, tears streaming down his rough cheeks. Clara couldn't bear the grief. She passed away just a year later from heart disease. From then on, Wendell raised Robert alone, his orphaned grandson, only 3 years old. Robert was Thomas's son, born before his father went to war. The boy was tall, with blonde hair and eyes as blue as the Tennessee sky. Wendell taught him everything: how to use a saw, how to read by the oil lamp, how to respect workers. "Life doesn't give us many choices, grandson," he often said during long evenings, "but we can choose to get up after every fall." Robert was now 16, intelligent and hard-working. He dreamed of becoming an engineer, building bridges and roads for his mountainous hometown. An acceptance letter from Tennessee Polytechnic Institute in Cookeville had arrived in Wendell's hands last week, a glimmer of hope amidst a difficult life. 4 years of tuition was $2,800, a huge sum for Wendell's $1.50 an hour wage. Today, after being laid off, Wendell sat in his house, clutching the crumpled yellow paper. 38 years, he whispered, from janitor to supervisor. Now they say the verbal agreement is invalid. He thought of the freezing winter nights when he stayed at the factory repairing machinery, of the times he saved workers from accidents. All that was left was 2 weeks' pay, $112. Robert walked in, his voice anxious. "Grandpa, what's wrong? I saw you came home early." Wendell forced a smile. "Nothing, grandson. It's just, there have been some changes at the company. I'll find another job." But inside, despair welled up. How could he afford to pay for Robert's college education? How could he fix the leaky roof before winter? That night, Wendell lay awake. He remembered the stories Robert used to tell about John Wayne, the strong cowboy on the silver screen. If Duke were here, what would he do? Wendell wondered, then laughed at his own foolish thought. John Wayne stopped his blue Buick on the side of the road leading to the Hermitage, the historic home of President Andrew Jackson. The Tennessee spring air carried the scent of wildflowers and red earth. Duke stepped out of the car, tall at nearly 1.93 meters, broad-shouldered, and with a steady gait despite being almost 50. He wore a brown felt hat and an old leather jacket, looking like a wealthy, wandering farmer. The Hermitage reminded him of his roots. His father, Clyde Morrison, was a pharmacist in Iowa, but his Irish Scotland blood always urged him to seek out rugged lands like the Appalachian. "Hollywood makes you rich, but it also makes you forget who you are," Duke thought to himself, as he strolled through the ancient gardens. He spent the morning listening to the guide tell stories about Jackson, the man of steel who built America from adversity. Duke nodded in agreement. A man who stood up for what was right. Then he drove on, continuing his journey through the Cumberland Mountains. The highway was narrow, flanked by dense pine forests, with occasional dilapidated wooden houses and small sawmills. Along the way, Duke stopped at a roadside gas station. The old man who owned the station, named Harlan, recognized him immediately, but only smiled. "Duke, I won't tell anyone." "Coffee?" They sat and talked on the porch. Harlan recounted the hardships of life here. Companies from the north buy factories and then fire the locals. They don't understand how much sweat we've poured into this for years. Duke listened, his jaw clenched. He remembered his filmmaking years, the struggles with directors and studios. But here, people struggle to survive. "You know, Harlan," Duke said slowly, his voice deep and warm, "sometimes the heroes aren't the gunmen on the big screen. They're the laborers, like you, like I used to be." Harlan laughed. "You're talking like in The Searchers. That's a great movie, Duke." Duke continued driving, the radio playing a melancholic Hank Williams country song. He thought about his family in California, his 3 children, his tumultuous marriage. "I have it all, yet I still feel something is missing," he told himself. This journey was his way of finding peace. As dusk fell, Duke stopped at Tate's Diner in Wartburg, and he witnessed it all. Inside Tate's Diner, the atmosphere was cozy, filled with the aroma of apple pie and roasted coffee. Earline Tate, the owner in her 50s, with her hair neatly tied up, was constantly wiping dishes. Duke sat at the counter, 2 chairs away from Wendell, trying to maintain a normal demeanor. Wendell walked in, his shoulders hunched, carrying an old lunchbox. Earline asked worriedly, "Wendell, why is your face so pale? Sit down, I'll pour you some hot coffee." Wendell sat down, his voice hoarse. "They fired me, Earline. 38 years, just because of a verbal agreement. The Cincinnati company changed owners, and they said they wouldn't recognize me. Just 2 weeks' salary. No retirement. Nothing." Earline covered her mouth. "Oh my God, Wendell. What about Robert? His college acceptance letter?" "He'll have to drop out," Wendell said, his eyes down at his coffee cup. "I promised my son in heaven I would take care of him." "Now." Duke sat still, but each word cut like a knife to his heart. He remembered Thomas, his son, the brave soldier. He remembered the miners, the real cowboys he had met. His hand gripped the cup so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Another miner sitting nearby chimed in. "They're from Cincinnati, dressed in suits, speaking in a pretentious manner. They don't know how to saw wood." Wendell smiled sadly. "I don't resent them. It's just, life isn't always fair." Duke stood up, dropped the money on the counter, and nodded to Earline. He walked to the back of the bar, where a sleek black payphone was mounted on the old brick wall. The afternoon sun shone through the dusty window, creating long streaks of light, like in a film noir. He inserted the dime into the slot and dialed Nashville. "Tim, this is Duke." His voice was low through the receiver. Tim was an old friend from First Tennessee Bank who had assisted him in several investment deals. "Duke, long time no see. Where are you?" "Tennessee. Listen, Tim, I just witnessed something upsetting. There's an old man named Wendell Pruitt, a supervisor at Cumberland Lumber. 38 years of service, fired just because of a verbal agreement. He has a 16-year-old grandson, Robert, who just got accepted to Tennessee Poly. I want to help." Tim was silent for a moment. "What do you want me to do?" "Anonymous. Transfer $46,000 into a trust fund. Enough for Wendell's pension, Robert's tuition, and some home repairs. Keep the paperwork clean. Don't let anyone trace it. I'll transfer the money from California tonight." Tim chuckled softly. The same old Duke, the quiet hero. Okay, I'm worried. But are you sure it's not a small amount? Absolutely. This isn't charity. This is justice, Duke said, his voice firm. He recalled the times he'd been helped when he first entered Hollywood, strangers who had given him opportunities. After the call, Duke stood there for a moment, smoking a cigarette, looking out at the mountain road. I'm not a movie hero, he thought. Just a man who knows how to do the right thing. He returned to the diner, paid extra for Wendell's meal without anyone noticing, then drove away into the Tennessee night. The next morning, as the sun peeked through the Appalachian pines, Wendell Pruitt sat at the old oak dining table in the four-room house. Robert was brewing coffee, its gentle aroma dispelling some of the heavy atmosphere. The dismissal letter lay on the table, like an indelible stain. Grandpa, I think I can get a job at another factory, Robert said, trying to sound cheerful despite the worry in his eyes. The tall, lanky 16-year-old had disheveled blonde hair after a sleepless night. Or I'll take a year off from school and work to help you out. Wendell shook his head, his hand gripping the coffee cup so tightly it trembled. No, grandson. Your father died for the country. I promised you a better future. I worked for 38 years, not so that you would have to abandon your dreams now. A knock sounded at the door. Robert ran to open it. A postman from Morgan County stood there, holding a thick, carefully sealed envelope. Mr. Wendell Pruitt, a letter from Nashville. Wendell signed for it, his hand trembling slightly. He tore open the envelope right there. Inside was an official letter from the First Tennessee Trust, accompanied by a transfer certificate. His narrow eyes widened as he read. An anonymous fund has transferred $46,000. The majority is for Mr. Wendell Pruitt's lifetime pension, based on 38 years of service. 4 years of tuition at Tennessee Polytechnic Institute for his grandson, Robert Pruitt, and home repairs. No repayment required. This is a gift from someone grateful to the unsung heroes of Tennessee. Robert read it over and over, his mouth agape. Grandpa, $46,000? Who did that? We don't know anyone that rich. Wendell slumped into a chair, tears streaming down his weathered face. He hugged his grandson tightly, his shoulders trembling with emotion. I don't know, Robert. But that person saved us. Maybe it was a good spirit looking down from heaven. All day, the two of them sat in the house, talking incessantly. Wendell recounted the details of the previous afternoon at Tate's diner. There was a tall man sitting nearby. He didn't say anything, but I felt like he was listening. Robert suggested, maybe we should ask Erline, or go visit the old factory, see if anyone knows anything. They drove their old truck out of town. Erline Tate at the diner had tears in her eyes when she heard the news. Good heavens, Wendell. It must be some kind of benefactor. Yesterday, there was a stranger, tall, with a deep voice. He paid for your coffee without saying a word. Robert excitedly said, we have to find him, to thank him. But Wendell shook his head, his voice pensive. Perhaps that person doesn't want to reveal their identity. We should just live up to this gift, grandson. That's the most sincere way to show our gratitude. That night, Robert lay in bed, looking at the photograph of his father in uniform. He whispered, thank you, stranger. I will become an engineer and build strong bridges for Tennessee. John Wayne drove his blue Buick back to Nashville, then flew straight to California. On the plane, he sat first class, his eyes watching the white clouds drift lazily by. Just a phone call, he told himself, but why do I feel so relieved? Arriving home in Newport Beach, his wife Pilar greeted him with a weary smile. His 3 children rushed out. Duke hugged them tightly, but his mind was still in the Cumberland Mountains. He immediately called Tim at the bank to confirm the transaction was complete. Nobody knows, Duke. The paperwork is clean. In the days that followed, Duke threw himself into preparing for Rio Bravo. the film he would star in alongside Dean Martin. On the Warner Brothers set, under the blazing lights, Duke embodied Sheriff John T. Chance, the man of steel protecting the small town. But during breaks between scenes, he thought of Wendell and Robert. One late evening, in his private office, Duke sat writing an anonymous letter. White paper, an old Parker fountain pen. He wrote to Robert, "My young nephew, I am a man who has traveled many paths. Life has taught me that true strength lies not in guns or fame, but in how we get up after every fall and help others. Study hard, become a good engineer, build lasting things for your homeland. And remember, in Tennessee, there is an old man who has dedicated his whole life, your grandfather, who is the brightest example. A stranger." Duke sealed the letter and sent it through Tim to forward. He didn't sign it, only wrote, "From a man grateful to the unsung heroes." On set, Duke shared part of his thoughts with Dean Martin, without revealing details. "Dean, sometimes I get tired of the lights. The ordinary working people are the real heroes." Dean nodded, and the two old friends raised their whiskey glasses, reminiscing about old times. Duke kept it absolutely secret. No press, no Hollywood friends knew. That was his own doing. A true cowboy. At Cumberland Lumber headquarters, the Cincinnati executives were baffled. How did this strange trust fund come about? Who's behind it? They hired private investigators, but all leads led to dead ends. The paperwork was perfectly anonymous. Wendell received a second letter, notification that his pension had started flowing regularly. He decided, "I won't search anymore. Let's use this money meaningfully." He repaired the roof, bought textbooks for Robert, and set aside a small portion to help Erline Tate repair her diner. Robert began preparatory school at Tennessee Poly. He wrote in his diary, "Today I studied bridge engineering. I will build bridges connecting the mountains, so that no one will be isolated like my grandfather was." Conflict erupted when a former manager at the factory tried to contact Wendell, wanting to share information. Wendell flatly refused. "I don't need to know. That person gave me a second chance. I won't sell my soul for curiosity." A feeling of gratitude and pride welled up in Wendell's heart. He often took Robert to the pine forest, telling old stories. "Life is like sawing wood, son. Sometimes the saw blade breaks, but you keep going." Duke, from California, occasionally received updates indirectly through Tim. He smiled when he learned Robert was doing well in school. That's the greatest reward, he thought. In 1979, John Wayne died in Los Angeles after a long battle with cancer, but his spirit lives on. In 1998, at the Sevier County Historical Society in Tennessee, an old wooden box was opened during the exhibition, The Silent Heroes of the Appalachian. Inside were a letter from Duke to Robert, an old Brownie payphone photo from Tate's diner, and Wendell's notes. Robert Pruitt, now a renowned 57-year-old civil engineer, stood before the microphone and recounted the story. "My grandfather was fired in 1957. A stranger changed everything with just one payphone call. We never knew his name, but we knew who he was. A true cowboy, a true American." Wendell Pruitt passed away peacefully in 1985 at the age of 83, with a smile on his face. Robert told his children and grandchildren hundreds of times. That was John Wayne. Duke entered our lives without a word of boasting. The story spread through generations, becoming a local legend. Visitors to Wartburg photographed the old Tate's diner, the payphone still there as a symbol. Duke never claimed to be a hero. He simply did the right thing. In the glamorous world of Hollywood, his quiet act in Tennessee in 1957 created a true legend, not on the silver screen, but in the hearts of ordinary people.